Hello, welcome to the Inside the Birds pregame show. I'm Geoff Mosher. That's Adam Caplan, and joining us as always from NFL Films, he's a senior producer, Greg Cosell. He's also the star of Inside the Tape on the Inside the Birds platform and of the NFL Matchup Show on ESPN. Greg, welcome back to the show. We have an interesting game to preview here, a Week 14 game between the white-hot Philadelphia Eagles, who have won 8 straight. They are now 10-2 versus a Panthers team that is 3-9. And I think we can maybe best describe them lately as feisty. They have covered, I think, the spread in 4 straight weeks. So we'll call them feisty. It's an interesting game. There's a lot to get into. We'll break it all down. Every game is very important now for all of the elite teams in the NFL because the number 1 seed in both conferences is still wide open and within reach. So there's a lot to talk about. I want to frame this game because I think a lot of people are looking at this like, it's the Panthers. What's there to say? So I want to frame it in the proper perspective. Adam and I discussed on the podcast the idea of a trap game. That's somewhat more of a college mentality because of so few big games in college, right? But there are times where we've seen teams not play well against inferior opponents. And I want to go back to 2017. The Eagles were 10-1 when they welcomed the Chicago Bears to town, and they beat the Bears 31-3. And after the game, Doug Peterson could only talk about how they turned the ball over 3 times in that game. And if they played like that again, they could lose. And sure enough, they went to Seattle the next week and lost. So you look at this game against the Panthers are going to come in hungry. And I think the way to frame this, Greg, is that the Eagles have to continue to maintain the standard that they've set here. There's no weeks off in the NFL. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think every coach takes that approach, Jeff. There's always human nature and you never know. We can't get into the heads of the players, so there's always games that when they play out, we all wonder, gee, how did that happen? Because they're better, or there's always games like that.
Sure.
And you hope you win those games because obviously they're human beings, so no one plays to their absolute best every snap, every single week. It's not the reality of life in anything. Yeah, this is a game I'm sure most fans feel like, it's a good way to do a lot of tailgating. The Eagles are going to win big, and we're going to go home, and then we're going to get ready for like the rest of the season and hope that the Lions lose a game. That's kind of what I think most fans are probably thinking, right?
I'm sure.
But I got to tell you, the Panthers have been competitive. You used the word feisty. They've been competitive, and we'll talk about that in more detail. And certainly on offense, Bryce Young. Last week in particular, I watched that tape and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if this will continue because there are issues with their O-line, but he really looked like a professional quarterback. And he's a certain kind of player because of his size, so he can only play a certain kind of way. But he really looked like a professional quarterback. And the Bucs rushed 5 or more on 25 of his 50 dropbacks, and he handled it really, really well. Now, the Eagles probably won't play like that, but I'm just trying to make the larger point that, perhaps he's moving in the right direction. But the overall point is they've been a competitive team the last 4 weeks.
Greg, I want to talk about, just stay on Young for a second. Let's go back to his college tape, just from what you remember, because I know you liked him. I remember you and I talked about him. We did our tape shows with you, so we talked about.
Oh, wait, he's in his second season, right?
Second year, right. No, look, now he's been benched already this season, but
right.
We just talked about it. This tape was good. He looked like a professional
Well,
quarterback.
he would have been in the 2023 draft?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, it was the first, I believe it was the first pick overall. Yeah.
He was. Yep. But just stylistically, what did you like about him? What were the traits? Because we always talk about you got to have positive traits if you want to be a good NFL player. What traits did you like from him coming out of Alabama?
I thought he was really intriguing because, first of all, he's 5'10" and an eighth. Now, he did get up to 204 for the combine, but, he's not 204. So let's say he's 185 or 190. That's probably more what he is. Now, you're dealing with a guy that has just a really small frame. There's nothing physically imposing about him whatsoever, and he does not have a gun by any means. So ultimately, what is he? He has to play the game with high level intelligence and high level timing and rhythm. I mean, he's a super smart kid. There's no question he sort of has a PhD in the nuances and details and subtleties of the position. He's that guy. He's tough. He's smart. He knows where to go with the ball. He sees things well. The problem for him is his size is a really limiting factor. And he's on a team, unfortunately, that has a poor O-line. And quarterbacks that are small can't really play behind poor O lines unless they're dynamic athletes. And while he's a good athlete and certainly can get out of the pocket on occasion, he's not truly a playmaker. He's not an exceptional, spectacular, oh my God, look at what Bryce Young can do out of the pocket.
Right.
So, he's on a team that, and Dave Canales, I assume their head coach will make a decision over this last part of the season as to whether Bryce Young's the guy going forward. But if he is, they have got to make sure they get an O-line. He can't play without an O-line. It's not possible given what he is.
Right. And of course, he was probably playing behind one of the best every year when he was at Alabama, as they always churn out big offensive linemen.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah,
they probably had a bigger O-line than the Panthers have.
no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I think Tyler Steen was part of that offensive line, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. He was the left tackle.
Yep, there you go. Last thing before we sort of get into injuries, Adam, one of the things that I think benefits the Eagles as far as not being complacent, not looking at any opponent as if they're less than them, is that the Eagles are one of the youngest teams in the NFL. So you have a lot of guys who haven't won a Super Bowl, haven't proven anything, especially on defense. You have your Cooper DeJean, your Quinyon Mitchell, your Jalen Carter. These guys are not only still trying to understand their roles and grow within them, but establish themselves, make sure they're here for the long term, which of course they are. But they're trying to impress Vic Fangio. Now that Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelce are on the team, you can't find a lot of guys who could say, yeah, I was part of that 2017 championship or even 2022. So this team still has a lot to prove. And of course, some of its best players like Saquon Barkley, right? He wants to win for the first time in his career.
Yeah, look, now what's interesting, though, is you got three guys who won big time at Georgia. The former Georgia guys on defense, Davis, Carter, and of course, Dean, and actually four, one like Nolan Smith too, right? So, look, they won a lot in college, but this is the pros here. Zach Bond was a part-time player for the Saints. He was a backup, and I think, did he actually was interviewed about this. Did he never make the playoffs or did he make the playoff once? I can't remember with the Saints.
With the
But
Saints?
he doesn't have a lot of,
yeah, it can't be a whole lot if he was there. Yeah.
Yeah, he said this is great. He said being in a playoff race like this is really cool. Rodgers didn't play last season. He was suspended. Cooper's a rookie. He's playing great. Mitchell played at Toledo. He's a rookie. He's playing great. Gardner Johnson was not here last year, as you know.
Yep.
Now he experiences. You had a great point about he's got a chance to play in the championship game 3 straight times, but they don't have a lot of guys who've been there and done that. Now Sweaty has. He was here 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's really on defense where they're super young. That's really where the age lies. And I got to tell you, they've handled success well to this point, though. Because I know where you're going here. Let's just see. This is a game where I just take care of business. But the players have to insulate themselves out from what the media thinks.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Sirianni's made it pretty clear. Like he gives everybody respect, and you got to respect the opponents because the tape will show. Greg just talked about it. The Panthers are pretty competitive on tape right now. So that is that'll get them right when they see the tape. But the bottom line is they got to handle success, and they just have to continue to play the standard. But I know Greg made the point. One more thing here that you're not going to play perfect every week, right? There might be some plays that they give up. Like if you look at the Jacksonville game where they dominated, then all sorts of craziness happened.
Yep.
I wouldn't call that so much a letdown. Did they get up big? That wasn't a letdown.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
A letdown game is where you turn the ball over a bunch of times. You're not careful. You miss plays you ordinarily make, things like that.
And you're flat.
Right.
If I could add, the other thing too is
Sure.
when those games do happen, fans automatically think, and it just because it's an easy thing to say that, well, they didn't come ready to play. You don't know those things. I mean, let's say this game turns out to be tough, okay? For whatever reason, maybe it is, maybe we don't know that. It's Sunday morning. We don't know what's going to happen in a few hours.
Yeah.
But the point is let's say it turns out to be tough. let's say by chance they lose. I mean, crazy things happen. Does that automatically mean that, oh, well, they didn't come to play? You don't know any of that stuff. That's just when you have access to the results, people say a lot of things just because they have access to the results. They have
Sure.
know nothing about the process.
Right. Well, yes, that then, and I remember a couple of years ago when the Eagles lost to Washington, a bad Washington team that ran on them, and the sky was falling, and then a week later they started up their win streak again
Right.
and to the Super Bowl. Let's talk about some injuries because you got some good news and bad news for the Eagles. We'll start with the bad news. Safety Reed Blankenship is out with the concussion. Sidney Brown out with a knee injury. Dallas Goedert out with a knee, and Britton Covey also out with the neck. The good news, and we'll get back to that in a second. The good news is nobody else carries an injury designation going into the game. That means you'll see the return of two important starters, one on each side. Devontae Smith to the offense and Darius Slay to the defense. As we have talked about, Greg, Adam, and I haven't done the research. I said I was going to do it, and I didn't. But there are only been probably less than a handful of games that the Eagles have had A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert all
Yeah.
playing in the offense. So once again, they're going to have to make do without their full arsenal there. But really, the story isn't missing Goddard because they've won without him. The story is how thin they are at tight end. And Grant
That's a
Calcaterra
CJ
may have
Uzuma
been number
game. What are you
one.
talking about?
Yeah, CJ. Hey,
CJ
listen,
Uzuma game.
did he not have a great block on Roquan Smith last week? Right? I mean, he did.
Played like 20 snaps last week.
Yes, he did.
He
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
So the question is, because the Eagles play so much 12 personnel and have been able to use both tight ends, does Uzama have to play a significant part of today's game? And does he have to get involved in the pass game at all?
I mean, are you asking me that?
No, I think that's just something we discuss is that it
If I
really
was in
is
the
a
meetings,
drop
I could
off.
tell you that for sure. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think they're going to go totally away from playing 12 personnel because that's kind of what they do. You know, although there will be a rookie who I really liked coming out, Smith Wade, who plays the slot now for Carolina. So I don't know if they'll feel like they want to put three wide receivers out there, maybe put Devontae Smith in the slot because he does move around. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But then it comes down, Jeff, to degree. How much 12 do they play? And that's a hard question to know because I think down and distance game flow also dictates that.
Right. Absolutely. So that's really the offensive picture. And Adam, defensively, if Vic Fangio had decided he had seen enough of his dime defense and would rather go to a big nickel package, well, not today, right? Because obviously they're down pretty thin at safety, but we will see Tristan McCullum start in place of Reed Blankenship, a guy who has worked really hard, has some really nice length. I think that was what the Eagles really were tantalized by coming out of, I want to say, Sam Houston State.
That is correct.
Right, where his coach Casey Killer is now the new Temple head coach.
Yeah. How about that?
And his twin brother also played there, Zion, who plays for the Bucks.
Yep.
But either way, he's got interesting length for that position.
It's interesting. Eagles absolutely love Zion McCollum. They were going to draft him, I understand, but they were out of whatever round Zion went. They didn't have any picks that round, I think. But
yeah, they made a billion trades that draft and wound up with no picks in the round.
Yeah, that's if I recall correctly, that's what happened. But getting to Tristan, he's a rare safety in terms of size. 6'3" is crazy size for a safety. And he's not just been a special teams player. If you remember his career, though, he started with Houston, bounced around with them, and he's been on and off the Eagles practice squad for better part of 2 seasons. But now he's going to make his first NFL start. I know our Andrew DeCecco talked to him. It's a nice story. They're paper thin now at safety, and they can't afford another injury there. Now the thing is, Blankenship, we know, has a history of concussion, so it's not a guarantee he's returning next week. You got to be careful. Remember, sometimes with concussions the next week, at least the guy gets on the field. He didn't even get on the field. So there's no guarantee that Blankenship will play next week against the Steelers.
Who would be the backup safety at this point?
It's Avonte.
I would think Maddox.
Avonte Maddox has been
he would
this
be,
week
yeah,
at safety. Yeah.
Matter of fact,
reported that.
Avonte played almost all safety in training camp, mostly safety.
Did.
Yeah.
So,
by the way, flipping that conversation, Grant Calcaterra is about to be the number one tight end and play a lot of snaps, and he also has a history of concussions. Now, he's been out there quite a bit in each game, but you are adding to his workload now, and he has a guy that has that history as well. Let's get into the Panthers injuries, Adam, what do you think? I mean, there obviously some of the more recognizable names are guys who are on injured reserve. We're talking about Shaq Thompson, right? And we're talking about Derek
Yeah.
Brown.
Yeah. So a couple things here. So from their opening game against the Saints, Derek Brown is out for this. He suffered a major knee injury, Derek Brown. So that's part of why the run defense has been really poor. Shaq Thompson tore his Achilles. Okay. It's a shame. A leader for this football team. He's been there for a long time. He is out. So if you look at their front seven, I think that's a major thing for them. And, it's such a shame. Austin Corbett, who came back from the ACL injury, then he had another major injury. He's their starting center. So he's out for the season with another major injury. Now they're optimistic about Jatavian Sanders, who they're very excited about. By the way, Corbett suffered a torn biceps in week 5. That was a season ender. So they've had Jeff, and we talk about Miles Sanders. We know that Miles Sanders was a backup to Chuba Hubbard, and Jalen Coker unfortunately had a setback with a quadriceps. So he'd been a good story. Ian Thomas is also on injured reserve. So Jeff, sending it back to you, they have a number of players, key players, who would have roles this season that are not able to play.
Yeah, so shorthanded, but as we've talked about, they've been competitive over the last few weeks. They had a nice little 2-game win streak, and then they played the Chiefs and lost on the last second field goal.
Oh.
And then somehow they had the lead over the Bucks last week with, I think, 30 seconds to play, gave up that lead and lost in overtime. So again, competitive. They're playing good teams fairly toughly. Greg, if you were to give a big picture view on why, other than Bryce Young starting to look like a professional quarterback, but why they've been a little bit more competitive too, is there anything that jumps out to you?
Well, I think they've been better on defense. Don't forget they got Josie Jewell back, and while he may not be an all-pro, he is a veteran linebacker who settles your defense down really nicely. They got DJ Wonnum back, who was a really good player in Minnesota, overlooked a little bit because they have other really good players, and that was a really big signing, I thought, in the offseason for them, and he's been back, and he's a good player. I think their corners, J.C. Horn's been healthy. They have 2 big corners, Horn, who was obviously a top 10 pick and is worthy of that, and Michael Jackson, who came from Seattle, not necessarily a great player, but both these guys are 6'1", 6'2". They're big corners. And they've got 2 veteran safeties. I mean, this is not a team bereft of talent. These 2 veteran safeties in Fuller and Woods. I mean, Fuller, I remember when he was with the Rams and talking to people at the Rams, and they said he was the key to their entire, even when Aaron Donald was there, he was the key to the defense in terms of setting everything up, making sure everybody did all the right things. I mean, so and so they do not have bad players. Just their D line is not what you want it to be, And obviously Derek Brown signed a big deal and then got hurt and is missing the season.
And Wonnum, by the way, was coming back from a major knee injury. He wasn't available. He missed the first half of the season. That plays into the record.
Yeah.
And this kid, LeBron Ray, came out of I know he's being pressed into service because of Brown being out for the season. Like their run defense, Greg, has been atrocious. So it's been really bad.
They don't have enough good players. I mean, A'Shaun Robinson's a nice player, but he's probably best served as a rotational player as opposed to having to play as much as he is. So, you get into that. But yeah, so now they're playing guys that, they're playing DJ Johnson, who came out of Oregon, who actually flashed a bit this past week. But still, these are not guys who you would have expected to play. Until Josie Jewell came back, they're playing the rookie Trevin Wallace out in Kentucky. And truth be told, I did not like his tape very much at all. And they were playing this kid, Claudin Cherilus at linebacker, who was a free agent from, I think, a smaller school. So, they were playing a lot of guys who, quite frankly, were more, they should have been backups for special teamers. But that's the NFL. It's the next man up, and you just got to line up and play.
I was chuckling a little bit about what you said about how the Rams felt about Jordan Fuller, because the NFL can be so unpredictable, but also so predictable at times. What would you say? Who would you say would be the player in Washington's secondary last year, the year before, that would have fit that same description as Jordan Fuller? The guy who was the glue, who made everything happen.
Probably Cam Curl.
Yeah, and who did the Rams sign to replace Jordan Fuller?
Yeah.
It's just funny how that works.
It's just funny how that works, right?
Because all that stuff comes down to money, and and look, very often coaches have different feelings about players and you guys know this even better than I because you deal with this more than I do. Coaches have different feelings about players than the front office does. I know when I talk to coaches, they'll mention a guy to me who I know because of the tape I watch, but generally speaking, out there in the world, people don't think of that player as so important. And the coach will say he's the most important player on our
Oh
defense.
yeah.
Right.
And
I got to have that guy. Or I love it in the draft, Greg, that in
yeah.
pre-draft meetings, coaches are saying, "I got to have this guy. I got to have
Yeah.
this guy.
Yeah.
Can't win without him."
I mean,
Right.
I
I
was
love
talking
that
to
stuff.
someone in Seattle today who said that the guy who sets the tone for everything they do on defense is Jaron Reed. I
Who's been
mean,
around forever.
and he's a
Wow.
rotational D line,
Yeah.
good player. No
Yeah.
knock. I mean, he's a good player, but he's a
Yeah.
rotational D lineman. But he sets the
Wow.
tone for their defense. You know,
Hmm.
who would know that unless you're in Seattle?
Of
Yeah.
course.
Interesting.
You guys know the social media meme where the guy is walking with a girl, but he's looking backward down
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so I always feel like the guy is walking with glue guy is who you're walking with. Athletic traits is the one you're always turning around and looking at because you can replace the glue guy. You lose Jordan Fuller, you sign Cam Curl, but they're always searching for the guys who run the 4.3s and have the 8 interceptions and things like that. It's the
And
NFL
if
is
you
funny
happen
and
to get
predictable that way.
both of those in one guy, that's when you've got something
Oh
special.
yeah, that's when you got it great.
Let me ask you this, Jeff. Let me ask you this question. Okay, since you brought, I didn't know we were going to go there, but I think it's a fascinating subject
Mhm.
because Eagles defense has been so elite. Is there a glue guy there? Or they're all good. Like,
Well,
they don't
I
have a
think
weak. No.
don't you think T.J. Edwards in the Super Bowl defense was the glue guy? Not the greatest athletic
2 years ago.
traits,
Okay, 2 years
but
ago.
yeah,
Well,
this year,
He's important.
yeah, I
Well,
mean
it's
this
funny.
year, I
From
don't
people
know.
I've
Yeah.
talked to in the building, and I've told you this, I
Okay.
keep hearing Reed Blankenship's name.
Perfect
Okay.
example.
Oh, the tone setter. You said that before. That's right.
Yeah,
Tone
that's
setter,
the
right?
name I keep
Okay.
hearing, you know?
Wow. Yeah.
So,
Makes a
again,
lot of
we're not
sense.
in the building, so I'm not going to sit here and, but
Yeah.
that's from people in the building.
Sure.
Former undrafted free agent. How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. All right, so let's talk about the Eagles offense and how it matches up, Greg, against this Panthers defense that, I mean, if you're just box score scouting or stat watching, I mean, they're 31st in total yards allowed, 32nd rush defense, 25th pass defense, situationally 32nd, which is worst in the league on third down. Hey, not too bad on fourth down, 11, ranked 11.
Right.
But obviously, third worst in the league in sacks per pass attempt. That's a defense that statistically has not performed well, but as you've mentioned, has some, they've battled some injuries. They've got some players back. I'm very curious about the matchup with J.C. Horn because you really like him, and he's been a great, when healthy, a very good corner in this league. Is he a trail guy, or does he stay to one side?
He normally stays to one side. Again,
Okay.
you never know depending on who an opponent is. So I don't want to sit here and say that that's an absolute given, but he has stayed pretty much to the boundary. He's predominantly their boundary corner,
Yeah.
and Jackson is the field corner. That's predominantly the case.
Okay. So I mean, obviously the Eagles move their receivers around, but there should be a decent amount of AJ Brown versus
Yeah,
AC
if the
Horn.
Eagles go 3-by-1 and Brown is the boundary X, you're going to get the Horn Brown matchup, and there will be meaningful snaps of that for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
They have tall corners. Mike Jackson's over 6 feet. Horn's
Yeah, that's
got
what I
good
was saying.
size.
And they
Yeah.
weigh a lot. I mean, they're not guys who are 185, 190. They're both over 200.
Who's on that team, and I know he was a total bust for the Titans, and he doesn't play much. Is Caleb Farley's on that team?
Yeah.
Caleb Evans, who they claim from they've got some talent on this defense. It's just putting it all together.
Yeah, well, the D line's the main issue, and they're having to play
Yeah.
Trevin Wallace at linebacker, the rookie from Kentucky, a
Small.
third-round pick.
Yeah.
Who it's evident that watching the tape, that he's not quite there yet in terms of what he's seeing. So he'll be attacked, I'm sure. But I would have to look. The Eagles will throw the ball at times, no question, when they come out in this game. But I believe they're going to think that they can dominate in the run game. Just looking at this D line, I think that they're going to feel that way. Now, again, that doesn't mean they'll never throw the ball early in the game, but I think they're going to feel for certain that their O line and the run game can, as the game progresses, can be a dominant factor.
Let's talk about what their defensive coordinator is. If I
And he's a
pronounce
Fangio guy.
Yes,
Yep.
a Fangio guy.
Zero.
Zero Evero might do. So he's a Fangio guy. Should we expect to see some 5-man fronts, some 5-1, some 5-2 looks? Does he blitz a decent amount? What is his mote?
Well, their base front is 5-2. So in other words, if the Eagles line up in 12 personnel, and in normal down and distance situations, he'll be in a 5-2 front or a 3-4. I call it a 5-2. Now they also gave a lot of snaps over the last couple of weeks to Gill and Johnson on the edge in their 5-2 front. So, that's what their base front would be versus 12.
Would you expect going up against the Eagles? Because I think some teams have started to do this who play the 5-2 front. They try to bring a late safety in as an extra run defender.
I would think they would probably do that. Um, I think they kind of do that anyway.
Mhm.
And by the way, both those safeties, Fuller's got good size, and Woods is he's been around the league, but to me, he's always played pretty well. He's just been one of those guys that's been on, I guess 3 teams. But he's an aggressive player. I mean, Fuller and Woods play every snap at safety. They're the safeties. They're solid NFL players. Yes, for sure. I think that would be the case.
All right, the Eagles' run game, Greg. I want to talk about what you saw against Baltimore, and especially when they go to decide to use some power, when they start taking linemen, tackles, moving them around, pulling, things of that nature, because they don't do that like that every single game, right? It just seems like every once in a while they'll use the athleticism of their offensive line to pull some guys and even some tackles and get a little extra beef on one side of the field there. Do you
Well,
have you figured
I
out like
think,
when they decide to do that and when not? Is it just
yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Sorry, but I will say that the guy who needs the movement and the angles and the leverage blocks is just Jurgens.
Mhm.
Now again, I don't know how they're going to feel in this game about the kinds of runs that they want to deploy as foundational, but Jurgens, he's a good athlete, he's a good mover. And he's stylistically like Kelsey. Obviously, Kelsey's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but so we're not going to sit here and say he's Kelsey. But stylistically, he's like Kelsey. His game is built more on movement than physical strength and power. So a lot of times they will try to get angle blocks with him. He'll be pulled in a guard center pull scheme. But I think that, I mean, to me, I think they'll feel like that pretty much any run concept can be effective against this front.
Right.
And Barkley, I think one of the things that's helped Barkley so much, and I know from talking to people that he's been talked to about this, and he's really taken to it well, is just staying downhill. We've seen Barkley very few times this year bounce. I mean, he has been staying on his downhill path,
Mm.
and that's one reason he's having a great year. Obviously, we know we can take it to the house on any given play. And
Mhm.
Jeff, I think you made the point, I think it was you the other night, that it sometimes seems inevitable that it's going to happen at some point in the fourth quarter. It does feel that way for sure. I think that
Yeah.
was a really good point. But I think what's made him Barkley this year as opposed to Barkley in previous years. Of course, it's easy to say he's got a good O-line, but you have to look at the player as an individual and isolate him, is that he is running downhill with much more conviction, much more force. He's not chopping his feet and tiptoeing and looking for something else.
Mhm.
He's getting yards. And you know what? You do that throughout the course of a game, and all of a sudden it breaks.
We were fortunate enough to have your television show partner Sal Palantonio on with us, co-host with you on the NFL matchup show on
Never heard of him.
ESPN. Yep, never. I know you've only worked with him 25 years, right? He was on with Derek Gunn on One on the Inside
Right,
platform. He spoke to Saquon Barkley after the game specifically about the 25-yard touchdown run in the fourth that sealed it.
which was no huddle, by the way.
Right. And it was involved Mailata, I believe, pulling from left to right. And he said that he just trusted that the space would be there. Because I guess it wasn't originally. You got to wait for the tackle to go over. And to your point, Greg, where maybe in the past he might not have had the trust, he might have bounced it.
Right.
He basically was saying to Sal, I trusted that if I just stayed the course, the opening would be there. And it was there. And Adam, we've seen this week after week, a different kind of Barkley than we saw with the Giants, who A, trusts it, B, will finish it. I mean, he is a
Yeah.
closer. I know Greg brought up the point that his second half rushing yards would be like fourth in the NFL. The closing element of Saquon Barkley is something that has been very new for us to
Yeah.
watch this year and really appreciate.
Yeah, the stuff that we heard, because again, it's either tape based or from people who were working with him over the years. It's just more decisive. You talked about downhill, and I like Greg's point. He's taking what's there. He's not what guys sometimes try to do more than they need to at that position. Some of it's look, it's some of what makes the innate talent that they have. They feel like they could break any gap If the place of the C gap, sometimes they think they could hit the B when maybe it's not there. You have to be careful with that. But it's a great story. The one I'll throw it back to Greg here. Pass protection wise, have you seen anything lately that would give you pause? Is it better? And it's status quo? Anything?
I don't
They
really
don't
recall
pass.
specific
They don't pass,
plays.
Greg, right? I'm just kidding.
What's that?
I said
No
they don't
pass.
That was a joke.
Yeah, no, I don't recall any plays, but just to
Okay.
play off the point, he has 982 yards in the second half alone, which would be 5th in the league overall.
Wow.
That's pretty remarkable when you think about it.
We should have MVP voting where if Saquon doesn't win MVP, maybe second half Saquon can finish second or third for MVP because that alone, like you said, has been unbelievable.
But I give him a ton of credit because he's run a certain way his whole life, and they've sort of tried to change his mindset to run a little bit differently, and he's really taken to it well. I mean, the point that Sal made in talking to Barkley, it's a great point. Is Barkley said he trusts it. Well, that's easy to say, and you can talk to a guy about it, but when you've done something your whole life, you have to really work at that. It's not just so easy to say, oh, okay, let's do it differently. But that was a gap scheme play, and yeah, they did pull Mailata. But he's just been really, really good. I remember talking, I worked with Merrill Hodge for years and years and years, and he would always talk about just getting the hard yards and then the runs break. He said, you don't look for the runs, they happen.
Mhm.
You get the hard yards every single time, and then it breaks. And Barkley has really taken to that this year, and that's the way he's run. I mean, this team, I don't have those stats in front of me, so maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't feel like watching them that they're in a ton of 3rd and longs. I don't know. Do you guys feel like they're in a ton of 3rd
No, a
and
lot.
longs?
Now that I
Very
think
few.
about it, no.
No.
True.
Yeah. So I was sorry, Adam, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and it's off what Merrill was telling Greg, is that if you look at this last game against Baltimore, because the first 3 quarters is under 50 yards he had, I think, maybe. Does that sound right? For
Barkley had 44 yards going into the 4th quarter.
There you go. Okay, 44 yards. Okay, I was in the vicinity. But it's the grind. They call dirty yards. This is what coaches use as a term. Jamal Singleton is that coach. He is one of the better run back coaches. I don't know what Nick's relationship was with him, but he's been around a lot. He was actually Chad Hall's coach at Air Force when Chad was a receiver, I think. Well, actually, probably running back then. But anyway, he's coached in pros, college. This guy's a veteran coach. And it's one of the reasons why, Jeff, as I throw it back to you, that they could take this jump, that they're clearly way better than last year. I know the record's similar, but you and Greg could attest to the tape. It's clean tape. They don't make the mental errors that they did last year. You don't have the coaching changes in season like you had last year on defense. The buy-in is better. The players have bought into Vic and his coaching staff. We're just talking about Jamal Singleton, who's been with his staff for a while. Coaching matters, and you're seeing the manifestation of it going forward here.
Yeah, and by the way, not just in Saquon, but now that you say that, and I don't think I ever made that connection before, but think of what we knew of Kenny Gainwell at Memphis compared to what we know of Kenny Gainwell, Eagles running
Different back.
Far more of a grinder, strong runner, between tackles runner as a pro than he ever was in college. And we've always said, where does that come from? How is it that he was not this receiver / sort of scat back type? Well, maybe to your point, it has a lot to do with Jamal Singleton being able to coach that into him, because it's certainly a role that has worked so far for Kenny Gainwell when he's asked to do it. He runs
as
hard.
you guys know, you've been around training camps. I wasn't at the Eagles one this year, but I've been to many, many in my career. You're dealing with grown men. What do players want? They want coaches to put them in positions to be successful.
Absolutely.
We're dealing with grown men. You don't yell at them. You don't, unless they're giving no effort, that's different. But as far as doing what they're supposed to do, players want to feel like the coach knows ball and is putting them in the right position to be successful. That's what ultimately it is. And everything I've heard about Barkley, I've never met him, but I hear he's an unbelievable guy and extremely receptive to coaching.
Yep. Definitely.
And Jeff,
that's because of his pedigree, Greg. You know where he went to school.
Penn State. Yeah.
Never heard of that school.
Yeah, there it is. He's wearing the hoodie. No, but I just want to say, Jeff, that off of what Greg said, it's part of the buy-in part of it, which you couldn't really tell at training camp when you were there. Because remember, Andrew Checo and I came back from training camp. We were both saying, like, I'm not sure about this defense. It had nothing to do with the buy-in. We would later know the buy-in because the execution was great. You just didn't know that coming out of training camp. And now we're seeing, and the players did talk. I should mention before we move on here, they did talk about Vic in the spring that they knew immediately he was no nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was your point you made minutes ago about this young defense. They don't know better. They're not a bunch of 8 to 10 year vets who you're not yelling at them, but who don't need coaching. These young guys need coaching.
Yeah,
I think that's part of it.
100%.
Very receptive to it.
Absolutely. Hey, Greg, before we move on, I just back to Vero. If he's gonna, let's say he's got the Eagles in a couple of third and mediums or passing downs, what's he gonna do from a pressure standpoint? Sim pressure, extra man pressure. Who's gonna be the guy that rushes if he does do that?
Yeah, I mean, well, a couple of things. They've been much more of a single high safety structure defense this season than a two high structure, which of course, obviously being a Fangio disciple, you'd think maybe that's not the case, but that's essentially what they are, and that's what they've been throughout most of the season. As far as pressure, they're not a heavy blitz team in terms of, just blitzing a lot. In terms of a high percentage. There will be some sim pressures, but as far as going after the quarterback, with 5 or 6, they're kind of middle of the road. They're probably like in the mid range. I mean, so they're not a team you look at and go, man, they're going to be coming after us.
Right.
And we'll see in this game because, that becomes team specific too, because Hurts can hurt you leaving the pocket. So you got to be careful about that.
Absolutely. All right, let's look at the Eagles defense versus this Panthers offense. We did talk about Bryce Young, what we're seeing from him, what Greg has seen from him on tape over the last few weeks. How about Chuba Hubbard, Greg? He has really emerged as a pretty darn good running back in this league. Got himself a really nice extension a couple of weeks ago. They drafted a kid in the second round out of Texas, Jonathan Brooks, who was injured and has not yet. He's played the last 2 weeks for the first time this year. Has not really put his stamp yet because Chuba Hubbard is doing such a good job. What do you like about Chuba's game?
Yeah, they're a predominant zone running team. Hubbard really fits that well because Hubbard is probably stylistically in his traits is more methodical than explosive. Like you wouldn't call him a truly explosive. He's had some long runs, but he's certainly more methodical than explosive. But they're predominantly a zone running team, and it'll be interesting how they work Brooks in because Brooks is a little juicier than Hubbard, and I really like Brooks coming out, by the way, and obviously he came back from an ACL, so he's being worked back in slowly. He's got really good contact balance. He's got great body control. He's just a little more explosive, and we'll see how that plays out. But Hubbard's been just really efficient. Really, he's another guy that gets hard-earned yards and keeps you on schedule. He's that kind of back. Now, he'll break one once in a while, obviously, all backs do, but that's kind of what he's been. And he's had a really good season. I mean, I think he's probably over 900 yards or so, something like that. He's had a really good season.
That's why they extended his contract. It's interesting. When they drafted Hubbard, the former staff, although some of that staff is still there, we're talking about the front office, they thought he was a 2. They never saw him as a starting running back. They thought they got a good value. He would just fill in. He would back up Miles Sanders. Well, it did the reverse work. Miles it's been a struggle for him. He's on IR. And Hubbard, as Greg just talked about, has had this great season. I don't want to see out of nowhere. He emerged a little bit last season.
Well,
but they drafted the kid in the second round this year for a reason because they wanted him to be the starter. And oh boy, now they're paying Hubbard around $8 or $9 million a season. Wow.
It's funny because I remember watching Hubbard's tape his next to last year in college, and I think he gained 2,000 yards that year. And he looked really good. And I thought, this guy's going to be, again, with running backs, you never know where they're going to get drafted. But I thought he had NFL traits, that he'd be a good NFL back. And then the next season, his last year at Oklahoma State, he wasn't very good. And I remember talking to some people saying, well, it looks like he mailed it in, like he didn't want to get hurt because he didn't want to hurt his draft. I don't know. That's what people told me.
Yeah.
I certainly don't know the answer to that.
Sure.
And I think that affected his draft position and it affected the way he came into the league. But he's showing those traits this year. I mean, he looks like a really solid NFL back. Like, I would say that he's not quite at this level, but stylistically, he's probably along the Josh Jacobs mold. Like a guy that has a more methodical, tough, competitive feel than a guy that's necessarily going to take it to the house,
Right.
Sure.
and that's the kind of back he is.
Well, his 4.9 yards per carry average is
Really good.
fifth best in the NFL for someone who has carried the ball at least 150 times. So he's making the most of what he gets. Does he catch the ball? Do they throw to the running backs in this offense that Dave Canales presides over?
Not the way you're talking, like he's not going to necessarily be used as a receiver in terms of running receiver routes, but
Right.
will they throw it to him, check down, swing routes? Yes. But I mean, he's not going to run receiver routes.
Gotcha. Okay. And it's not a big part. Not like what Canales did with Rashad White last year in Tampa.
No, he's not Rashad White.
Gotcha. Who are the guys in the passing game that could threaten the Eagles defense?
Yeah, that's where they're lacking a bit too. I mean, obviously, they've got Thielen, who's just a really, really solid guy. I mean, he's a good receiver. They have I'm trying to think of the other guys that they
Leggett.
have.
Do you like Leggett?
Oh, Leggett, the rookie.
Yeah.
Leggett, yeah, I forgot about him. Leggett is, he's a big guy. He's a physical guy. I think he's still working through becoming an NFL player. But I thought his college tape was good. I think he'll be good. He's not there yet. The problem is their third guy. Now they're playing David Moore, who's been around the league. He's free agent type player. They had a bunch of drops this week too. So and Leggett had some
Oh.
drops too, which would I kind of surprised me. But yeah, so that's their when they go 11 personnel, it's Thielen, Leggett, and Moore. The tight end is Tommy Tremble. Jadavian Sanders, is he on IR?
No,
No,
he
he's good.
should play.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, he's
should
okay.
Yeah, he had a neck issue, but he worked a lot this week. I was told they're pretty optimistic.
Oh, good, good. I like
Yeah,
him too. I mean,
yeah.
you might see, more 12 personnel with him, being available because Tremble's not a bad player. I mean, he's obviously not a volume target, but he's an interesting guy. So yeah, you could see them playing more 12 personnel if they choose to go that route because Sanders is a good receiver.
Adam helped me learn about a new university thanks to David Moore because I had
Oh,
no idea there was, I believe it was East Central Oklahoma,
yeah,
the name of the
something like
school
that.
that Yeah, I looked it up. It was it's
It's
East
pretty crazy
Central.
because I did him coming out of college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got that East
I,
Central
What
tape?
Yeah,
Seven-
what year did he come out?
2017. So
2017.
Dan Morgan, the Panthers GM now, probably was with him in Seattle.
Yes,
And,
yes.
and Moore, I remember talking to the Panthers. It's kind of like when they drafted George Fant out of like George Mason or something. They thought nobody ever heard of David Moore. Now, Greg, you saw his tape, which is fascinating because boy, you were reaching down there. He got drafted seventh round, but he's been with a number of teams. He was their third receiver last week. I mean, he's
Yeah.
that's kind of where they're at.
Do
No,
you
I
guys
just pulled up his, by the way, he's almost 6'1", he's 219. In his pro day in college, he ran a 4.43 with that kind of size. I mean, he was an interesting receiver for a small school guy.
East Central Oklahoma, the
Yeah.
popular East Central
There,
Oklahoma.
there are, yeah, there were stud elements to his game coming out of college. Obviously, he's playing,
Yeah.
he's not playing Power Five schools, but he's hung around the league since 2017. I mean, people think you can line him up and play with him.
8 teams. Wow.
By the way, can you name the five-time Pro Bowl pass rusher that also went to Eastern Central Oklahoma?
Easton. Oh,
East Central Oklahoma.
The five-time Pro Bowl pass rusher.
how many
Yep.
years ago? How many years ago did that play?
It was in the late 70s, early 80s.
Oh, late
Oh,
70s.
wow.
He's pretty local, not Eagles, but local.
Oh God, I don't know.
Mark Gastineau.
Oh, did he really go there?
Yeah, I was shocked. I just saw it on ProFootballReference.com.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing.
Wow.
How about
Where did he
that?
grow up anyway? Wow.
But anyway, just getting back to Young, because
Yeah.
he's ultimately the thing is you've got to get pressure on Young because his game has to be built on timing and rhythm. The ball has to come out. He's not because of his size and the fact that he doesn't have a power arm. he's not a late in the down pocket player. He'll get out of there just because he knows his own ability. He can't sit there. The bodies get closer to him. He can't see, and he can't sit on his back foot and drive the ball. Although he made a couple of far hash sideline throws in this game, but he had a lot of space. So, he needs space.
Got it. All right. Real quick, the offensive line for the Panthers, has it been playing better lately? Because he's been playing better lately, but we've seen this Eagles defensive line give a lot of issues to even better offensive lines.
Personally, based on tape, I don't think their tackles are very good in pass pro.
Okay.
Iguanu was a high first round pick. I think the people who thought he was a guard have probably been proven right. I'm not sure he's a tackle in terms of pass pro. Taylor Moton's been there a long time. I have to tell you, watching his tape for years, I just think he's a guy. I think he's a very beatable right tackle.
Oh boy, this could be interesting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're gonna beat the Eagles, you usually need to be pretty stout on the offensive line, or your quarterback has to play, has to stand on his head.
They did make the right decision in the offseason signing 2 guards. Obviously, they gave Robert Hunt a ton of money. They also signed Damian Lewis because they understood that you have to secure the depth of the pocket when it comes to Bryce Young. And the interior of your O-line secures the depth of the pocket, and that's critical. Otherwise, he can't play. And you mentioned Corbett being out. Cade Mays, kid from Tennessee, is starting at center. I did him too coming out. I kind of liked him, but they've been better in recent. I mean, Young has looked like a more comfortable player in recent weeks. When I watched the tape this week, I said to myself, "Oh, it's another week. This guy looks like a professional quarterback." And he's always going to look a little frenetic just because he's smaller and he moves. And I mean, that's just the way he plays. He's not going to look like a 6'4", 220-pound statuesque stud. He's not going to look like that.
Right. All right. Good stuff. We've wrapped it up. Offense versus defense, vice versa. Let's predict our game winner and our player of the game. Greg, I'll start with you. And before I get your picks, the Eagles are 13.5-point favorites, and the over-under number is 45.5. So what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to overthink this one, Jeff. I'm going to go Saquon Barkley. I just feel like that they can really run the ball against this team, and I don't think it's going to wait until the middle of the third quarter and the fourth quarter. I think that they'll be able to run the ball pretty consistently. It's easy to look at this game and go, man, they're going to kill him. I think they're going to score. I don't think they're going to have a problem scoring necessarily. That doesn't mean I think they're going to get 38 or 40. I would look at this game as like a 30-17 kind of game. That's the way I would see this game, and Barkley would be my guy.
All right. Greg says 30-17. Saquon is the guy. Adam, what's the score? Who wins? Who's the MVP?
So I have it. Eagles 27, the Panthers 13, and I've got it. Kenny Gainwell, because they're going to blow him out. And no, I'm just kidding, not Kenny Gainwell. It'll be Barkley. No, but they should have this game under control, and this should be a 175 to 200 yard game for Barkley. Even Gainwell should do well as a closer because they shouldn't be close in the fourth quarter. Coming into the link, it should not be easy. By the weather, it's actually going to be fairly decent.
It's supposed to be 50 and sunny.
Yeah, surprisingly. But it's just hard, and I'm interested to see what happens if the Eagles could get up early, because remember the Panthers had a terrible loss last week. They blew that game. They should have won it, and we'll see what their mindset is early on. Is there a carryover from a terrible loss, or hey, do they know they need to get away from 2 tough losses at home? You never know about that stuff, but it's fascinating to see what the first quarter looks like.
All right. I'm sort of just in the same boat as you guys and really close with the score as you, Adam. I see the Eagles winning 27-13. I actually think it's going to be more like 27-6 until maybe a late garbage time TD for the Panthers. But nonetheless, that's what the score will be. And I'm going to say Jalen Hurts will be. I think he's got 2 passing, 1 rushing, or 2 rushing, 1 passing. He's going to account for a lot of offense against the Panthers. That's going to do it for Inside the Birds pregame show. For Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. Enjoy your football watching, and we'll catch you on Inside the Birds postgame live.